What up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I'm giving you 5 reasons to not start a podcast in 2024. The landscape is different now. There's a lot you need to do in order to grow a successful podcast. And for the average Joe, I wouldn't do it. And if you're not the average Joe, if you can answer these 5 reasons with integrity, then you should start a podcast. But for most of you, don't start a podcast in 2024, and these are the reasons why. Before we get into it, just want to give a shout out to this podcast sponsor. That's Riverside. Head on over to riverside.fm and take advantage of their online recording tools. You can record 4K video and high fidelity audio. You can also use their AI to generate show notes, transcriptions, video clips, and more. That's riverside.fm. Enter promo code CLIPPED for 20% off. All right, 5 reasons to not start a podcast. Let's give it a go. So I wouldn't start a podcast in 2024 and beyond unless I had some sort of business, i.e. like a product or service that's interwoven into the ecosystem of the podcast. Maybe you offer some sort of service like video editing. Let's say you own a video production agency, and within the podcast, you're teaching people how to edit videos. You're interviewing video editors, agency owners, and within that, you can slowly start to weave in and plug your product or service, in this case, video editing. Gone are the days of just launching a podcast and trying to monetize through ads. If you want to grow and monetize, you're going to need some kind of product or service, and your podcast needs to be a piece of a larger business. In my opinion, if you don't have that, it's going to be much harder to succeed. And I wouldn't start a podcast without some of those roots and making the podcast one piece of your total content strategy and of your business. Number 2, if I were you, I wouldn't start a podcast unless I had some kind of basic understanding of SEO. It's getting much harder to rank on Google for 2 reasons. 1, because of AI. If you've seen lately, you type something into Google and an AI will pop up and give you an answer to your question. And number 2, Google's been doing a ton of different updates to their algorithm. 1 being the helpful content update. And so if you don't have like helpful content in your podcast, if you don't have a website for your podcast, and you're not giving like relevant, helpful information to the people that are searching on the web for that information, it's going to be much harder to rank and get your website and or like the landing page of your podcast to come up when people type in search terms related to your show. The next are the EEAT requirements, and this stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And this is a factor that Google's now using to rank websites. So if you want to get your website, which ideally contains a page for your podcast, to the top of Google, you're going to have to encompass these things in your content. That's experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And so if you're just having a podcast with your buddies and you're laughing, smoking, drinking some beers, talking shit, having a good time, that's great. But you're not really demonstrating any of the EEAT qualities, and thus Google isn't going to pay as much attention to your podcast and your website. It's going to be harder to rank, thus it's going to be harder to get more ears and eyeballs on your content. And this ties into my next one, number 3. If I were you, I wouldn't start a podcast in 2024 unless you're going to host some kind of show that informs or educates. Entertainment type shows are really hard. They're hard to grow. Those channels are hard to build and get like a loyal fan base because chances are you're not that entertaining. There's a ton of talent out there, and if people want to search for entertainment podcasts, chances are they're going to go to like the comedy section and maybe scroll the top 20 shows and pick one. Or chances are they already have their like social media favorites on all the channels that they follow that make them laugh. If you don't already have like a track record in entertainment, or maybe you think you're funny, but you're probably not, it's just hard to build. I mean, the talent out there these days is crazy. And unless you have some kind of track record, it's going to be hard to grow a show like that. And number 4, don't start a podcast in 2024 unless you plan on doing some solo episodes to grow your influence, to demonstrate your expertise or your knowledge about a topic where you're actually like helping people. People have questions, whatever niche or genre you're in, and you're kind of answering some anticipated topics that people that are interested in that genre might be thinking about or asking themselves. The more like free information that you put out and you help people and you educate them about a subject, the easier it is to grow. And if you're just doing interviews, yeah, you can pull that information out of your guest, but you really want to position yourself as like the face of your brand and the one with the knowledge and expertise. If you're not going to do solo episodes, I would steer clear of launching a podcast because you want that brand authority. And interviews don't necessarily give you that. And lastly, if you're trying to just monetize through ads, you're going to need a massive amount of downloads to generate like real revenue. This kind of goes back to point number one, which is you need to have some sort of business or product or service that's tied to your podcast. If you think it's just like put it up on YouTube, put it up on Apple and Spotify and release some clips on social and get enough of a following that advertisers are actually interested, that's few and far between. I don't have the data, but you'd got to be in like the top probably 10% of all podcasts out there to generate actual revenue. So if your goal is to launch a podcast just to make money, because you hear all these ads on all the shows you listen to, like BetterHelp and LegalZoom and whatever, chances are that's not going to happen. And I'm not saying that to discourage you. It can happen, but it's probably not going to happen for you. And I hate to break it to you, but that won't be lucrative unless you have massive downloads. All right, guys, that's it. That's 5 reasons why I wouldn't start a podcast in 2024. Unless you answered those with integrity and strategy and having those things in place, then I think you could be on your way, not off to the races, but on your way to slowly growing a steady, successful podcast that makes money, that builds influence, that grows your brand and your business. Keep listening, keep engaging, keep creating. I'm out.